one of the big things about this reform process is a tariff reform mechanism to look at how do we restructure tariffs.
This seems to be, the wholesale market is more for your institutional users. So the ordinary South African, you and I, we're probably sitting there saying, okay, and then what, So what is the relationship then for an ordinary South African between market reform, reliability, affordability, investments and jobs, because those are the key things that South Africans would be looking for. And if we can just take them each, just starting perhaps with reliability.
So I think the big thing from a reliability perspective is that at large scale, the consumers, the large power users specifically, are trying to make sure that they're capturing or able to meet their future demand through long-term commitments, which means that you get bankability. So new generation is being built, which will enhance reliability. There is always going to be that gap as to what you're doing about customers who can't exercise choice. And so there's phrases like captive customers, that they are captured by the municipality or the local distributor, that they can't move over to make choice. So that really is still a space for the regulator to make sure that their interests are being managed. There are some important considerations around affordability. If the large power users are able to exercise choice, and they can always go to a cheaper generator and therefore leave a more expensive option, are the other consumers now having to pay more because the big pot is being supplied to smaller group of customers, which means the costs are going to go up. So one of the big things about this reform process is a tariff reform mechanism to look at how do we restructure tariffs. So some of the costs, like for example network charges, network costs, you make sure that all consumers pay for the network regardless of who they're buying from. So when Sasol buys from a third party, they're buying their energy, they're still paying the network charges, they're still supporting the grid. When people build PV on rooftop and batteries, etc., they're supplying themselves, they still need to pay for the grid because the grid is the backup. And the grid needs to be maintained. I know it's not a popular position, but the idea is that backup is really important and people depend on it. So you need to be able to support that and make sure that earns its revenue. There is another concept of generation capacity. So now Eskom at the moment has a lot of capacity that is built, which acts as the backup for everyone else's supply. At some point, you need to start paying for that almost as like an insurance premium. You're paying for the backup so that if your PV facility is not operating or the wind is not blowing, you can get energy, and you're paying for someone to stick around and supply that energy when you need to. I always use the argument is that when we look at this integrated resource plan, so the IRP in the future always looks at our future grid is predominantly supplied by renewable power, but it also looks to back up either through batteries, gas generation, and other options that you would build. Those options are there as backup. They're not there for the energy component. They're there to supply the grid when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. So you need to make sure that those facilities are built. And that mostly, if we're talking about gas as the backup, means that the cost of building the gas power station has to be recovered by all consumers, even if they're not using it, because it's a backup for when the system requires it. So again, not a popular opinion, but the whole idea is that backup is actually important for the grid and needs to be recovered from all consumers. So when Sasol and others are buying, and they have the freedom to do so, they're still contributing for a capacity backup system should they lean on it. So if their supply doesn't meet their demand, they will come to Eskom or to the market, and then the market needs to have that capacity available to be able to supply them. And so we pay for capacity as a separate kind of service. The third one, and it's really important from the discussion of affordability, is subsidies. Right now, built into our entire utility tariff mechanism or retail tariff mechanism, there are built-in subsidies, some of it on a network basis. So we subsidize rural consumers from urban consumers. That will remain. The network charges will recover some of that tariff cross-subsidy. What really becomes problematic is the affordability subsidies. So when households who depend on lower tariffs now need to be able to ensure that that shouldn't change when the moment the market opens. They shouldn't lose that tariff that's keeping them going. But then distribution and the municipalities need to be able to earn a revenue or get paid through a subsidy framework or a cross-subsidy mechanism. So at the wholesale level, we might charge customers like Sasol and those who are buying for themselves, they would pay us some sort of surcharge or surplus to cover for the subsidies that need to go to other consumers. Because otherwise, distribution and the municipalities have a huge risk that they're paying the large power users who, one, are paying, and two, are subsidizing other consumers. The moment they start choosing third parties, they lose that revenue. And that is part of this whole subsidy kind of consideration, and the wholesale tariff needs to have a subsidy mechanism to allow that those consumers are still earning or getting a tariff that makes them viable.